So, good morning, everyone. Namaste. Myself Nishan, and we are Think India. Think India is a forum of students with nation-first approach. We have students from premier institutions like Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Management, and national law universities. So we have been conducting sessions during this COVID lockdown period and try to use or utilize it in a productive way. And continuing our sessions, we today have a very profound personality, a well-known name of politics as well as academia, someone we have seen in Oxford Union debates or lit fests. And today we have Bajant Panda sir with us. So namaskar sir, thank you for joining us.
Namaskar. Thank you.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest for today, although he doesn't need one, but sir actually serves as the National Vice President of Bharatiya Janata Party and as well as spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Sir is also an author to have authored books like Lutyens Maverick. Sir is a columnist and writes columns for various English dailies, and one of them is Indian Express. And apart from all these, sir is also a helicopter pilot. So sir is quite adventurous also. So today's topic is India and its neighborhood. And so we have the format of the session will be sir will be speaking on the topic, and then we can go on with question answers. So without any further ado, I'd like to request sir to please start the session.
Namaskar. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to some of the brightest young minds in our country. From the kind of institutions you are in, it is clear that you and your generation will have an important role in the coming years in shaping our nation's destiny. So I would like to speak for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and I would like to leave the rest of the time for Q&A to have a more interactive session. And I will need to leave by 12:30. I hope that's okay.
Yes, sir.
So let me start by pointing out that when we talk about our neighborhood, really everything comes down to one word today, and that is China. Because all the issues that we need to deal with are in some way related to China. It was more than 2 decades ago, under late Prime Minister Vajpayee's leadership, when then Defense Minister George Fernandez said it publicly for the first time, that our real problem, the enemy that is really plotting against us, is not Pakistan. Pakistan is a small fry. It is China. Now, to understand China, you have to understand that China has an extremely long-term thinking. This is very unusual for most countries, and especially for democracies like us, because democracies are, because of the nature of the system, we are forced to focus on urgent issues of the day. And our system does not encourage extra long-term thinking, because our leaders have to get re-elected every 5 years. And this is not just for India, it's true for other democracies also. So China is famous when Mao Zedong was asked that, what do you think about the French Revolution, which happened almost 250 years ago? He said, it's too early to say. Because they think in long term. So China's long-term strategy, you can see, is very evident from the way both India and China became independent in the 1940s, in the late 1940s. And we both broke from the colonial rule. But we continued the colonial systems, the same bureaucracy. Most of the laws are still continued from 19th century and early 20th century colonial times. Whereas China completely broke from their earlier system. They set up a communist regime. And you know the whole story. Now, our first prime minister got carried away by thinking that China is professing friendship, Hindi Chini bhai bhai. And we let our guard down. And as a result, we lost thousands of square kilometers of land, which may be a barren piece of ice, like he said, but it apparently has a lot of potential in future because of mineral wealth and so on and so forth. Now, China, another aspect you need to keep in mind is that China and India are not just the two largest countries in the world, very similar populations, 1.4 billion to 1.3 billion. But historically, this is a very important thing. Historically, China and India have dominated the world in a more or less equal capacity. So if you think about economics, for instance, if you think about economics, so just 300, 400 years ago, China and India together accounted for almost the biggest chunk of the world economy. Now, think about modern days. As recently as 1980, that means just half a generation before your cohort was born, when I just was in college, I graduated from school. In 1980, India and China had the same per capita income. So we were very similar capacity in terms of economic strength and military strength. In 1962, we lost not because they were much more powerful, but because we were complacent. And if you want, there is a very good book everyone should read about it called 1962, The War That Wasn't by Shiv Kunal Verma. It's a very important book to read. So what happened from 1980 onwards is very interesting, because after death of Mao, Deng Xiaoping, the next leader, he realized that communism was not working. It has never worked. Communism and socialism has never worked in any country. You look at USSR, you look at Cuba, you look at Vietnam earlier, you look at Venezuela today, it has never worked anywhere. So they decided they have to adopt free markets to grow. But they did a very interesting thing. Unlike other countries with free markets, such as US or European countries, they continued to have the Communist Party stay in full control, no democracy, but markets were opened up. And as a result, China grew dramatically for 4 decades. So the fact is, from parity, China has today become 5 times of India's size in economy. And this 5 times of economy gives them much more military power. They spend on aid budgets around the world, which is today outdoing even the big developed nations like America. But we have also started picking up. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. So about 5-6 years ago, the Chinese economy had already become 5.5 times of India. And the projections were that the Chinese economy will become 6 times or more of India. But no, the trend has reversed. From 5.5 times, instead of going to 6 times, it has come down, and today it is 5 times. So if this trend continues, we will start catching up with China more and more, giving us more leverage. All of this is important because what China did for 45 years is it had a truce with India. So for 45 years until last month, there was no shooting between China and India. Unlike with Pakistan we always had shooting and killing and terrorism directed at us. In China, we had scuffles, but it was always physical scuffling, no shooting, no deaths, no killing. And during this time, they grew economically very powerful. And at some point, hubris got to them. Deng Xiaoping, who was the architect of modern China's strength, has always advised that Chinese leaders should not get arrogant. They should not have hubris. They should keep a low profile until they become the biggest, most powerful nation in the world. Today, they are not. Economically, they are second biggest. Militarily, they are quite far behind America, but they are a very powerful nation next to America. Now, let us take a look at our neighboring countries. We, as an independent nation, as I said, we never threw away the colonial legacy because of the people that took charge. For various reasons, Sardar Patel, who had been expected to become our first prime minister, could not. And our focus became very much of a left-oriented approach. And in that process, somehow, Pakistan, of course, is understandable. Pakistan has an inbuilt problem with India because they, under Jinnah, defined the so-called two-nation theory, which has failed. The two-nation theory failed in 1971 when Bangladesh broke away, and it became clear that religion is not their binding force. And so Pakistan is a special case. Their entire reason for existence is to be not India. So they have brainwashed their people, trying to disown their past, trying to pretend as if they are descended from the Arabs, which they are not. So Pakistan is a special case. But if you look at our other neighbors, so with Nepal, with Bangladesh, with Myanmar, with Sri Lanka, it is worth keeping in mind that we did not always manage our relationship very well. Now, part of this is natural because, as there is an old saying, that it is hardest to keep good relations with your immediate neighbor with whom you share a fence. It is easier to keep relationship with farther neighbor. This is true for other countries also. If you look at China, China has a problem with Vietnam, China has a problem with Japan, China has a problem with Taiwan, and so on and so forth. But our approach became to these neighboring countries that we should be equals. Now, in principle, that's fine. But the reality is, India accounts for well over 80%, maybe 85% of the economy of South Asia. So many of these neighboring countries always looked up to us to be more magnanimous, to be more generous, to have an open, to give them more benefits than we should not be seeking parity. And we did that with Nepal, but we did not always have that same relationship with our other neighbors. In recent years, a lot has changed. So first of all, the biggest dramatic change is our improvement of relations with Bangladesh. So a few years, 5 years ago, under the Modi government, we resolved our land border dispute with Bangladesh. This is a very historic thing because we had disputes since 1947. And we still have other things on which we disagree, but Bangladesh is in some ways our closest neighbor today. And we are now reconnecting the economies. Railway connection is again being rebuilt. Electricity connection is again being rebuilt. And this is important because the more trade you have, it is on an equitable basis, it is better for relationship. Pakistan has always avoided and created hurdles in the way of having better trade. You may have heard of the MFN issue. India granted most favored nation status to Pakistan, but Pakistan never did for decades until finally we also withdrew it. Now, let's take a look at Sri Lanka. We have had a convoluted relationship with Sri Lanka, particularly when they had a long period of civil war. In 1980s, we unnecessarily got drawn into their civil war. As a nation, we must always have a relationship with the nation, not with one faction of it. And we got drawn into it, and that led to various complications, including the involvement of a Sri Lankan group in the assassination of a former prime minister, and so on and so forth. But things have improved a lot in recent years. But if you look at what is happening in Nepal today, what is happening in Sri Lanka today, and what they're attempting to do in Bangladesh and other places, and Bhutan, China has a clear long-term plan. So they used those 45 years of truce with us, not peace, but truce, to do two things. A, have economic growth. And this is a very critical thing to keep in mind. Remember, this is a phrase some people have used, and I have often used it, that our single best foreign policy initiative should be high economic growth. If you have high economic growth, all other aspects will fall into place. Look at China. With high economic growth, they have got the ability to fund much bigger military capacity and the ability to buy friendships all over the world. Now, starting 22 decades ago, China started a slow process of encircling India, and that phenomenon has been described as the string of pearls theory. So like a string of pearls, they have put up communications outposts, naval crossing lanes, and other setups just to encircle India with a long-term view in mind. Over 50 years, 100 years, they have other plans. So the best example of this is Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, which they funded, and it was supposed to be a commercial project. And this is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, often called the Here, I would like to say that we have also started doing what China has been doing. So we have opened the Chabahar port in Iran. This is crucial. Chabahar port has been in planning for decades, but it just happened, commissioned only last year under this government. And the Chabahar port gives us a chance to have access to Afghanistan for strategic reasons, which otherwise everybody has to go through Pakistan. That is why Pakistan has leverage over the Western countries and over China, that because Afghanistan is such a hotspot for global terrorism, for other problems, they use their geographical advantage, Pakistan does, to hold everybody else hostage. So we have started now with small operations at Chabahar port, which should be scaled up in coming years. Now, I'll start winding up my initial comments now and say that look at what has happened in Nepal today. China has invested heavily in Nepal over the past decade to try to turn the country against us. And the way it does that is not only by investing in infrastructure, like I was explaining, but you may have seen recent reports. China is actually interfering in their politics. When their ruling party is having internal dissension, the Chinese ambassador in Kathmandu is going to meet their president and trying to resolve their problem. Now, this is very, very odd in any normal, anything odd. And they have heavily invested not just in infrastructure, but in people, in politicians, in crucial functionaries in government and other places to further their agenda. So you can see that we have certain tensions that have been building up. And China has constantly put pressure on our neighbors by recently again threatening Bhutan by claiming some land that they have never claimed before. So this is typical of China to continually keep advancing their claims and their agenda. But let me again remind you that in an authoritarian system like that, where there is no consultation, basically a very small team at the top manages the entire country, unlike a democracy like India. Now, it's true that many people in opposition in India try to portray the government, the Modi government, as authoritarian, but that's not true. The Modi government has to win elections, it has to carry people, it has to pass legislation in parliament. Until now, we don't yet have a majority in Rajya Sabha, so it still takes a lot of effort behind the scenes to get legislation passed. So that is not authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is in China, where you don't have to answer to anybody and you clamp down with force. So because of that authoritarianism, sometimes judgment goes wrong. So ironically, you will see, while they have partially succeeded in making Nepal, some of Nepal's politicians hostile to India, at the very same time, they have also stepped into Nepalese land and acquired some villages forcibly. And within Nepal, there is now a reaction that we thought China is our friend. China is supporting us against India, but China has taken over some of our villages and lands. And similarly, Myanmar is an area where India and China have been in competition. India has been giving aid to Myanmar, and India has supported Myanmar's aspirations for development, but has always been outdone by China because China has had a bigger budget. So, the concern has always been that China will outspend us in trying to keep our neighbors with them and to create problems for us. But again, just last week, you may have seen the Myanmar government has reacted very badly, saying China is pressurizing it and threatening it. And this is typical. You'll hear similar things from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Philippines, from Vietnam, and around the neighboring areas of China. So this is something that that may be an advantage for us, because China overplays its hand by not having a feedback system, by not having a consultative system, by not being able to calculate the reaction. So China has not been able to calculate how strongly India reacted in Galwan Valley last month. They had always expected that little by little, creepingly, they will acquire more land, which they have done. Here, let me point something out to you. Most people think we lost land to China only in 1962, but we have lost land even recently under the UPA 2 government. So there is a confidential report filed by then Foreign Secretary Shyam Saran about 7-8 years ago, which records that under the UPA 2 government, India lost a further 670 square kilometers to China. So China has always successfully done this. This is the first time or actually I should say this is the second time after Doklam in 2017, where India has pushed back, and so ferociously that it led to a lot of lives being lost on their side as well. So for the first time, you are seeing China has had to eat some humble pie and is backing down. But we should not be complacent. Remember, in 1962 also, the initial clashes were resolved, and China pulled out of Galwan Valley. But 3 months after that, they started the war, and where we had so many setbacks and lost Aksai Chin. So we should not underestimate them. So I would conclude my talk by saying that China's hand is visible in our current scenario all around our country. As far as Pakistan is concerned, China has always used it as a pawn, as a client state. And it has used Pakistan as a low-cost option of slowing down India. The other options of slowing down India, China would have to have much more military expenditure, much more economic expenditure. But instead of that, just by funding Pakistan, which then uses terrorism to try to slow down India, is one of their strategic objectives. So with that, I will end my initial discussion about the neighborhood and the challenges that India faces, and why we have to really stay focused that the issues that we face in the neighborhood are mostly symptoms. The cause is largely having to do with China's foreign policy, but not entirely. There are certain things we can do and we should do to reach out and build better rapport, better strength, better abilities with all our neighbors. Pakistan is in a different cup of tea, different kettle altogether, because they have a fundamental intrinsic objection to any kind of rapprochement or settlement with India. But that's not the case with all our other neighbors. Nobody has a fundamental opposition to India. So we must also use Sam, Dan, Bhed, Dan, Chanakya Niti to make sure that our neighborhood is conducive to us. With that, I will conclude my talk, and we have up to half an hour for question answer.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for explaining the topic so greatly. We have the questions, and the first question is from Shivam Saurabh. Shivam Saurabh.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah, you are audible, Shivam. Go forward.
Yes, sir. I would like to shift my focus to Afghanistan, which many believe doesn't share any border with us. But since Pakistan is POK is an integral part of India, we share our border through Pakhan corridor. My question is very specific. The agreement between the US and the Islamic Emirate of the Taliban of failure on our side, considering the fact that we have been putting efforts lately in Afghanistan, and sir, what possible damage has been caused with the agreement, with that agreement? And my second question follows: are we in the interest to play a role as a intra-Afghan dialogue? Like we have been mainly focusing on the economic development and military assistance in the country.
So you're quite right that of course we do have a border with Afghanistan, because Pakistan occupied Kashmir legally belongs to India. Now Pakistan can make all sorts of claims, but as I pointed out in my Oxford Union debate, those of you who have seen it, legally all of Jammu Kashmir belongs to India, because the same rules applied to all the princely states who signed the instruments of accession. So yes, we do have a border with Afghanistan, but the ground reality is, of course, physically, we don't have direct contact in Afghanistan today, because POK is occupied by Pakistan and China. So we have got great goodwill in Afghanistan. After the overthrow of the Taliban regime, again, they allowed music to be played, and not everybody had to wear face coverings, veils. Girls started going to school again. So if you go to Afghanistan, you'll see tremendous goodwill. I have interacted with a lot of Afghan politicians and citizens and activist groups, tremendous goodwill. In fact, Afghans hate Pakistan, because Pakistan's ISI has done exactly to Afghanistan what it continuously does to India. So we have great goodwill, and we have contributed tremendously to Afghanistan's renaissance and resurgence. But goodwill is one thing. For us to play a role there becomes difficult because of logistics. And since we are not there physically. And if we were to get physically involved, it would be a humongous commitment in terms of budget, in terms of military operations, in terms of lives. Many, like thousands of American soldiers' lives have been lost over the past 2 decades in Afghanistan. We would have to have the same prospect. So if we are not prepared for that, and right now we should not be, because we are still a developing country, we should not be spending half our military budget only in managing Afghanistan. So with goodwill, we are doing quite a lot of things. But for us to have a real presence where we can be a mediator in Afghanistan, today it is not the case. But we are in a much better situation today compared to a dozen years ago when the Taliban were ruling. Now, that agreement is understandable. America knows that Pakistan has continuously cheated America by taking funds from the US and using it for terrorism rather than for development. And America also has fatigue because this is the longest war. It's longest than the Vietnam War, much longer than the Iraq War, longer than their civil war, and longer than their war of independence. So they have fatigue, and they continue to have a small presence. But the thing is, very soon after that agreement, it has started breaking down. There have been assassinations. So it's not easy for any civilized country to actually have that kind of an agreement in Afghanistan, because what the other side wants is to turn the clock back to a completely medieval kind of arrangement, which no country can really officially agree to. So it's a situation in transition.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Rachit Nand.
हेलो, नमस्कार सर। मेरा सवाल है, बहुत सारी चर्चाएं हो रही है सर विस्तारवाद के बारे में। तो यहाँ पे सर एक आइडिया चल रहा है कि पाकिस्तान, चाइना और भारत तीनों बहुत ही पावरफुल आर्मीज को कमांड करती हैं। तो सर ऐसी स्थिति में किसी भी दूसरे देश की जमीन को लेना मिलिट्री ऑपरेशन करके सर प्रैक्टिकल नहीं होगा अभी के टाइम में। तो सर ये आइडिया है कि जो जिसके पास जो है उस पर ही वो खुश रहे। तो सर क्या सिर्फ ये समस्या सिर्फ जमीन की समस्या है या इसके आगे भी समस्याएं हैं? थैंक यू सर।
तो आपने एक सही बात कहा कि ये एक न्यूक्लियर डॉक्ट्रिन का आउटकम है 1940 से, जब पहली बार परमाणु अस्त्र इस्तेमाल किया गया अमेरिका के द्वारा। फिर उसके बाद यूएसएसआर के पास आ गया और न्यूक्लियर क्लब जो बना है चाइना, फ्रांस, यूके मिलकर, कि इसका आउटकम ये रहा कोल्ड वॉर में कि जिसको कहते हैं मैड, म्यूचुअली एश्योर्ड डिस्ट्रक्शन, कि युद्ध होने से न्यूक्लियर एरा में वो सीमित नहीं रहेगा, वो बिल्कुल अंत तक जाएगा और दोनों देश बिल्कुल ध्वंस हो जाएंगे। तो वो बियॉन्ड ए पॉइंट नहीं जाते हैं। लेकिन पहली बार हमें देखने को मिला कि पाकिस्तान में और नॉर्थ कोरिया में इन्होंने न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स को यूज नहीं करते हैं डिफेंसिव पर्पस के लिए, वो यूज करते हैं ऑफेंसिव पर्पस के लिए। धमकी देते हैं कि हम आपको मारेंगे, लेकिन अगर आप रिटेलिएट करोगे तो हम न्यूक्लियर इस्तेमाल करेंगे। तो न्यूक्लियर अम्ब्रेला के छाया में उन्होंने, पाकिस्तान ने 30 साल इंडिया को, जो कहते हैं ब्लीडिंग बाय 1000 कट्स करके, टेररिज्म के माध्यम से इंडिया को बहुत नुकसान पहुंचाया। लेकिन अभी आपको पता होगा कि पिछले वर्ष ये 30 साल का कैलकुलेशन को उखाड़ दिया मोदी जी ने, जब हमने बालाकोट में स्ट्राइक किया वापस। ये 30 साल के बाद हमने डेमोन्स्ट्रेट कर दिया कि देखो, वो जब कुछ प्रोवोकेशन करते हैं उसके बाद हम रिटेलिएशन करने के लिए डरते थे क्योंकि न्यूक्लियर हो जाएगा, लेकिन न्यूक्लियर थ्रेशोल्ड काफी ऊपर है और रिटेलिएशन ऐसा हो सकता है कि वो न्यूक्लियर तक ना जाए। तो आप अभी भी देखा है कि चाइना भी ये कोशिश कर रहा था। तो इसमें थोड़ा केयरफुल रहना चाहिए कि ऐसा हो सकता है कि थिंग्स कैन एस्केलेट एंड स्पाइरल आउट ऑफ कंट्रोल, लेकिन ये जरूरी नहीं है कि स्पाइरल करे। तो जमीन की बात यह है कि बहुत सारे तरीका से ये हो सकते हैं। अब देखो, ये एक सिविलाइजेशनल मामला है। हम नहीं मानते हैं कि कोई इलाका में पॉपुलेशन माइनॉरिटी का ज्यादा है तो ये इंडियन हो ही नहीं सकता है। ये तो हम नहीं मानते, क्योंकि हमारे संविधान में हर कोई धर्म का, हर कोई जाति का व्यक्ति को इक्वल राइट्स मिलता है। और पाकिस्तान को जो कहना है कि अगर आप मुस्लिम पॉपुलेशन हो तो आप इंडिया का नहीं हो सकते हो, वो तो डिस्प्रूव हो चुका है। टू नेशन थ्योरी डिस्प्रूव हो चुका है बांग्लादेश में। तो लेकिन पीओके को अगर हमें फिर कुछ करना है मिलिट्री एक्शन में, ये डेंजर हर बार रहता है कि वो स्पाइरल हो सकता है। लेकिन देयर आर सो मेनी वेज। चाणक्य नीति में श्याम दान भेद दंड सब कर सकते हैं। आप अगर देखे होंगे रिसेंटली पीओके में बहुत सारे उनके प्रोटेस्ट और अपराइजिंग और रिएक्शन बढ़ते जा रहा है। सो देयर आर मेनी वेज दैट यू कैन अचीव our geostrategic objective without having physical conflict.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Shivendra Shandilya.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question is related to the same with which you spoke. Are we late for responding on CPEC? Means now we are getting what you have mentioned that in POK there are some activities which we are witnessing now. Resistance for CPEC in local communities is increasing, but are we not late?
So you have hit upon something very interesting, but we are not late just about CPEC. We are late. See, CPEC is one of the surface issues. At a much deeper issue, let me point out, China started its economic reforms in 1978-79. And for 40 years, as I explained, they had double-digit growth, which is why they went from same per capita income as in India to today 5 times per capita income as India. We are late in that fundamental issue because first of all, we did not start any economic reform till 1991. So we were some 12 years behind them. And uske baad bhi, they continued a sustained reform. And we never had sustained reform. 1991 के बाद next reform हुआ 7-8 साल के बाद जब वाजपेयी जी आए थे और हमने गोल्डन क्वाड्रिलेटरल हमारा हाईवे सिस्टम बनाया और ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में जो प्रधानमंत्री ग्राम सड़क योजना बनाए, जो रूरल कंक्रीट रोड्स बनाए. तो आफ्टर दैट द नेक्स्ट 10 years we lost reform under UPA government, and now reform has started only in last 5 years. I think there are some other microphones that are open. May I request other mics to be on mute? Yeah. So the answer is we started reform late and we have been doing in fits and starts. But fortunately now we are doing reform continuously for last 5-6 years. If you look at the many fundamental reforms that the Modi government has brought in. So the essential difference is what more could we have done on CPEC when we did not have the budget, when we did not have that kind of military capacity. So same thing applies when China was, Hambantota port, Sri Lanka was trying very hard for India to invest. I'm talking about 15-20 years ago, but India did not have the budget, did not have the ability. So our fundamental problem is we are late because we allowed China to become 5 times our economy. We should have grown. And because of lot of internal resistance, especially by leftist parties and even the ruling party for last 60 years, so that is where we are fundamentally late. So we have to manage the situation and buy time until our economy truly becomes the 3rd largest in the world, which everybody is projecting it will become in the foreseeable near future.
Thank you, sir. The next question, I have a question, sir. So I have a question on Baloch issue. Sir, Baloch issue is an important issue of Pakistan. And there are a lot of, means Balochistan doesn't, the Baloch people do not consider themselves as the part of Pakistan. So like Pakistan does a lot of talking with separatist elements from Kashmir like Hurriyat or Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. So how do you think of a narrative wherein we can establish a Baloch government in exile in like we have did of Tibet? So in the same way, we can introduce a Baloch government in exile in India. So how will be that narrative?
Achha, listen, I have to maybe wind up very quickly because I'm getting an urgent call from my party office. Yes. Perhaps give me 5 minutes. I'll deal with that. But since I'm getting an urgent call, let me take care of that and get back to you.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Yes, my apologies. There was an urgent call from the party headquarters. So let me get back to Balochistan issue. You are quite right. So Balochistan, in fact, did not sign the instrument of accession to Pakistan when the initial thing happened. There are books out there, particularly one by Tilak Devasher recently, which explains how Pakistan betrayed. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was the lawyer for the ruler of the Baloch princely state, and he had argued in court with the British that Balochistan did not belong in Pakistan. And after he became their first leader, he took a totally different stand and forcibly made Balochistan join. So there are tremendously strong arguments that Balochistan is not part of Pakistan, and they have sent. Balochistan has had a lot of problems. As you know, they have a freedom struggle going on. There's tremendous repression and violence inside Balochistan. Now, what India can do has to be extremely careful, because India has taken a principled stand against terrorism. And we have been the biggest victim of the world in terrorism, sponsored by cross-border terrorism sponsored by Pakistan. So we have to take a very careful, measured stand that we should not be equated just like Pakistan. Then our argument can also become a little weak, that, okay, they are doing terrorism, you're also doing terrorism, so it's the same thing. But we can take a principled stand on Balochistan, and there are many ways we can help Balochistan. We can help Balochistan through financial, or the Baloch freedom fighters through assistance, through even financial assistance, through not just moral support, but actual support in global forums. As far as covert operations or anything goes, this is really not a forum to talk about it. We must ensure that our own interests are protected. But it cannot be just a knee-jerk reaction to do in Balochistan what Pakistan is trying to do in Jammu and Kashmir. Because we have the support of the entire world as a different, responsible, large nation. So we have to tackle things a little differently and more mature.
Can you ask my question, Nissan?
Next question is from Kaushal Kishore.
Hello.
Yeah, we are able to hear you.
Yes.
Please ask the question. Please ask the question.
Okay. Namaste, sir. My question is, sir, does India need to relook its neighborhood policy or its relationship with neighboring nations? Because, sir, India still has issue with his neighborhood nations. Like in case of Bangladesh, India is still issue in the Tista water dispute, and recently NRC dispute, and Myanmar and with Myanmar also has issue due to Rohingya and northeast insurgent groups, and Nepal, sir. Nepal due to, sir, after 2015 Nepal India border blockade, the issue.
We have got your question, Bhaiya. I guess.
Yeah, sir.
Sir, is
okay.
Yes, sir.
So let me answer.
Yes, sir.
My answer is yes and no. First of all, let us keep in mind that our neighborhood policy is not a failure. It is largely a success. Of course, there are certain individual setbacks which we must correct. So let's take Bangladesh. as I said, we have had a huge success by resolving the border dispute. I agree with you that TISTA is something we should resolve. And one of the problems with Indian foreign policy, especially for the neighborhood, was that for 30 years we had coalition governments. And often our policy towards some neighboring country was decided by some state in India. So we have an issue still in with Bangladesh, because our state, which is bordering Bangladesh, has many, it adds many angles to it. Recently, it stopped border trade, which Indian traders are objecting, Bangladeshi traders are objecting, but the local state government, our state government, West Bengal, is stopping that trade. So yes, we do need to make some corrections. Similarly, you correctly pointed out that the blockade on petroleum in 2015, some people have argued that that was not correct, because we don't need to show our muscle. Everybody in the neighborhood knows our muscle. I mean, Nepal is a much smaller country than India. We don't have to show muscle. There are other ways of incentivizing them to be friendly to us and disincentivizing them to be unfriendly to us, rather than using that kind of strength. So yes, we can make some course corrections perhaps, but overall, our policy is not failing, it is succeeding. So with Myanmar, we have no real dispute with Myanmar, because as far as Rohingyas are concerned, Myanmar has the same stand with Rohingyas as we do. Myanmar says that the Rohingyas are not Myanmaris, they are Bangladeshis, they should go to Bangladesh. And those Rohingyas, only few Rohingyas have come to India. Our stand is, look, if you say you are being persecuted in Myanmar, then coming to India, you are crossing hundreds of kilometers of Bangladeshi territory. So if, where in Bangladesh, the state religion is your religion, there is no persecution. So you can't say that you have to come to India. This is the principle that most countries follow, by the way. In Europe, when they give refuge to refugees, they say that whichever country you first come into, you must take shelter. So if you go to Greece, but you don't want to stay in Greece, you want to go through to Germany and then to UK, that's not how refugee policy works. So similarly, we have no real conflict with Myanmar, really. Myanmar has been very cooperative, and in recent years has started cracking down very hard on some of the insurgent groups from India who used to take shelter in Myanmar. Now you mentioned Northeast insurgent groups. So it's a huge success, because if you look at history, even when I was growing up, Northeast was a complete chaos. It was like Jammu and Kashmir used to be recently, or like Punjab was in the late 1980s. But Northeast has been peaceful for now 2 decades or more. Of course, we have not fully resolved the problem, but it's under control, and there is a great deal of improvement compared to 2 or 3 decades ago. So I am convinced that the Northeast issue is getting more and more resolved as more and more people from our Northeast are getting integrated into India. There today, if you go to, of course, before COVID, if you go to airlines or hotels, you'll see a lot of people from Northeast participating. Our really fundamental problem is only with Pakistan, and we have tried everything. Even Modi ji, in his first 2.5 years, did everything. He went to Pakistan, did everything to try to resolve issues. But you must recognize that in Pakistan, the civilian government is not in control. I have met many politicians from Pakistan. They are privately very reasonable, but they don't have the final say. The final say is there from the army. And, unlike any other country, the army gets a huge share of the economy. They own many of the companies on the Karachi Stock Exchange, from bakeries to large companies. They run the sports teams, cricket teams, everything. So army benefits by having permanent conflict with India, because if there is no permanent conflict, they cannot justify that kind of budget. So other than Pakistan, we don't have fundamental problems with any of the neighbors. Yes, we can do some course correction, but largely we are on the right track.
Thank you, sir. This probably will be the last question. Is from Prashant Kumar Mehta.
Ji, namaste, sir. My question is regarding our neighbor Afghanistan, sir. Many in our country are in favor that India should talk directly to Taliban, and many are in opposition. But sir, what is your views in that? What can be our long-term strategy regarding this?
So this is a very similar argument that is made regarding Pakistan also. Many people tell us that we can have some kind of arrangement with the army in Pakistan, and rather because they have the power, and rather than talk to the government, which really doesn't have power. Same argument is being made in Afghanistan, that the government is only there because the US forces are there. Once the US forces are not there, we'll have to deal with Taliban. So we'll have to have some kind of rapprochement. So remember, countries, if they operate on principle, have a better long-term chance of success. Short-term, you can get some benefit. If we do some short-term benefit arrangement with Pakistan Army, we may get some temporary truce, but they will never give up the whole attempt to destabilize India. With Taliban, we have a fundamental problem. Forget about the fact that they kidnapped they hijacked our airline, killed people, bargained and got release of terrorists who then created havoc around the world. But the values that they stand for, that they don't at all agree with people being educated, especially girls should not be educated. They don't allow music in their country. They are very clear about religious differences. So there is no fundamental place of agreement with them. Of course, we cannot be naive. So we must deal with all kinds of people. हम नहीं कह सकते हैं कि हम सिर्फ साधु संतों के साथ डील करेंगे. तो उसके लिए चाणक्य नीति is required, and that is what you are seeing today. साम दान भेद दंड सब कुछ करना पड़ता है. So many times you can have back channel discussions where you keep lines of communications open so that during a crisis you can have some kind of coordination. But to have a fundamental approach will require something very different. Of course, if tomorrow Taliban are the government in Afghanistan, then we will have to deal with them openly. There is no two ways about that. But as of today, it is in our interest, and we have taken a principled stand that we want an Afghanistan which is democratic, which is run by elected people and not by people with the gun. So that has paid great dividends for us. As I said, we have great support among the common Afghan people and their government and their politicians. We should not squander that. But we can have, as I said, all kinds of back channel contacts with all kinds of people.
Thank you, sir. It was great interacting to you. Actually, we have seen you in debates, and it was a privilege for us to interact with you. And sir, thank you for giving us your valuable time. You are quite busy these days, but you took out time for us. And sir, if you have any concluding remarks, then please, sir.
I'm very glad to see that people of your generation, particularly you all who are accomplished people in your own right, are taking an interest in foreign policy. I have suggested 1 or 2 books for you to read in the course of the discussion. I will also suggest many of you may have read it, but if you haven't read Ocean of Churn by Sanjeev Sanyal. So Sanjeev Sanyal, this is not a very big book, but it's a wonderful book documenting India's history and role, especially in India, called Ocean of Churn by Sanjeev Sanyal. That is definitely a book worth reading. And if any of you are interested, I have I read a lot. I read about 1 book a week, and I have a Twitter handle dedicated to that called Books Panda. And on Books Panda, you will often see my excerpts from the books I'm reading. You may get ideas for many of the books I read have to do with history and with geopolitics like this. So I think you may find some of that interesting. So let me conclude by suggesting Sanjeev Sanyal's book, Ocean of Churn, for those of you who are interested. Thank you. And it has been a great pleasure. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.